Welcome to the third mini lecture for Chapter 17. We're going to pick off right where we left off, looking at developmental stages of forages. So here's a forage legume versus a forage grass. So this is when those producers will use indicators of where that growth and development stage is happening, and so that they can figure out when they're going to harvest their crop. So you can see a vegetative development stage to a seed for that forage legume, and then a forage grass, you'll see that vegetative stage again, but down at the bottom is a ripe stage, and there's a little bit more stages that happen with grasses than legumes. So we really have to know what type of grass are in our pastures and what type of grass or legume we're harvesting. And we'll talk more about that in class. All right, grazing land. So we teach a class here called Pasture and Range Management. So what you'll do in that class, if you take it, you'll learn about 40 different types of grasses, mainly what's grown in the southern part of the United States and a little bit of the northern part. But we'll talk a lot about pasture versus rangeland. So before we get into that, we need to look at what a grazing land is. So all a grazing land is an agriculture setting or land, a plot of land that we use to plant or keep up plants so that livestock can graze them. Okay, so we have two types of them. We have pasture, we have rangeland. So pasture ground is where we will fence and we grow either perennials or annual forages on there, and we maintain them. Rangelands are more of a native species, and we see them in more drier areas, and they may or may not be fenced. All right, so we have different types of systems with grazing. We're going to talk about two main ones. In pasture and range management, if you take that, we'll talk about a lot of different ones. So what is a grazing system? It is just a way that we can directly manipulate how that forage will be grazed. Okay, so if we're going to look at two. We'll look at continuous grazing and we'll look at rotational grazing. And I'll show you a picture of them here in just a second. But why do we do this? Why do we maintain these grazing systems? The whole point of it is to maintain a good animal performance so that we can and influence it by that stocking rate, or the stocking rate is the number of animals per acre. Okay, so now let's look at those graphs of a stocking rate. Sorry, not a stocking rate. We were talking grazing systems. Okay, so on the top there, the top left, you will see a continuous grazing system, continuous stocking. So all that means, let's say you have 50 acres and you have 15 mama cows. If you're doing a continuous grazing system, you are going to throw those 15 mama cows out on that 50 acres, and they're just going to continuously graze it. Okay. Rotational stocking. This is this can be anywhere from 4 to many different paddocks or pastures. You're going to fence them, and you're going to move that livestock from one pasture to another, one mini pasture to another mini pasture. And this could be every week, this could be every month, this could be every 2 days. So it's just in a rotational system. So if you look at the strip grazing down there at the bottom left, you'll see we'll start those cattle, we'll start that livestock on the left-hand side, and then we will move that fence. It can either be a portable fence or what have you, but you will move that fence to the right every couple days, maybe once a week, and they will just really strip that pasture. Creep grazing is where we have babies on one side, mamas on the other. Those babies will creep feed, and they still see their mamas, but more so they're going to creep feed as well. So this is a graph that'll show you the productions per acre per animal. So we're looking at really stocking rates here. So the number of animals compared to the acres that we have on them. So we're looking at the production per animal per animal or per acre. Okay, so and then the available pasture on the bottom. So if we have a very low available pasture to a very high available pasture, you can see in this graph that cattle or any type of livestock have to have the correct grass or correct legumes with the correct acres to maintain good performance. So we're going to do a fun little Play-Doh activity with this in class this week, and you're going to be able to utilize and make your own grazing system and compare it to what a stocking rate would be. All right, haymaking. one of my favorite jobs when I was growing up. So how do we make hay? The first thing we have to figure out is where we're going to store it when we have it, and why we're going to store it. A lot of people around this area will store hay for the winter months, and so but there's many different ways that you can manage that or make it into food or feed for livestock. And so we have to figure out where we're going to store it, have to have the correct percent of moisture, and we have to dry it in that field a little bit so that we're not getting toxins, we're not getting microorganisms in there, and it's not going to mold. And so we have to store it in a dry barn, and we have to store it. We have to wrap it, okay, bale wrap it. All right, so this is a pretty cool picture. This is windrows of alfalfa. So this is probably somewhere in the northern part of the United States. So they're just windrowing that alfalfa and then probably come back with a square baler. If any of you grew up on a farm or in a rural area, probably one of your first jobs were baling some small squares, and that's probably what they'll be doing with this alfalfa. All right, so this is this is just a graph that shows you the loss in dry matter in making hay and silage. So silage is where we cut up different crops and just make it very fine and add some different wet matter to it. And so you can see by this we have a lot more storage loss compared to harvest loss when we're looking at that dry matter versus the moisture percent as well. Silage, like we talked about, we're going to cut it up in the field. You can have a silage maker. A lot of people will use corn silage. A lot of people will use hay silage. Some people will actually mix the two. So we look at for that high moisture forage that has a lot of aerobotically specialized structure. So it's going to use the air to make that good quality silage. We use this, unfortunately, sometimes we have to use this in very dry seasons or very dry years. So for drought-like situations in 2011, we had one of our worst summers on record heat-wise, and we're considered in drought conditions. And so it was so bad that people actually had to cut their corn crop up for silage and try to sell it. And people were actually baling their corn crop up and trying to sell the corn bales, which is really hard because you didn't get the money that you would have gotten if you sold it, if that corn actually matured. So that's why we use silage. There are good and bads of silage, and we'll talk more about that in class and talk about what you making that decision for your own production. All right, so this is how we store silage. We can either store it in a silo or we can bag it up, and that's what that looks like. All right, let's look at a couple different ways we harvest different crops. So cotton, this is when we harvest cotton, it's actually in bowls, not a ball, bowls, and they'll actually open and they'll reveal that white fiber. And we use a picker or a stripper, and then they'll be arranged, and they're actually baled up in what looks like round bales, or they can actually do them in squares now as well. So this is what that looks like. This is what a cotton stripper and a picker look like. All right, tobacco. So once that flowering stage happens, those flowers then have to be removed. So when we're harvesting, we're picking those mature leaves so that as they develop, in some cases, they'll actually cut the entire plant as well. So then that nicotine content will then determine the content of that tobacco plant and then determine what kind of price you'll get for it as well. Those stalks and leaves will be cured for a couple different reasons, to be used in other ways, but and then it has to be stored in a very well ventilated bales. All right, sugar beets. We're going to look at one of these this year. We will talk about how we harvest it a little bit more then, but have to be at the correct sugar concentration before that harvest starts. The foliage, so the top of that beet, has to be removed, and then we have a digger that comes in and will remove it. they have to actually store that air temperature will reduce to a respiration of 0 degrees Fahrenheit, and the quality is determined by that concentration. So then that's how we determine the price that you'll get paid for that sugar beet. Potatoes, these are really fun to watch harvested, and we'll show this in the crop of the week as well. So foliage first has to be destroyed, just like a sugar beet, has to be cut off first. Then after a few weeks, that potato can be dug up by a potato harvester. So then we have to look at the thickness, the starch, the flavor of it, the color, and it's stored at 40 to 42% or degrees Fahrenheit, sorry.